Good vibes, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the ESPN Esports Call of Duty League show called Search and Destroy. Arda and Emily with you. Not much to talk about from a tournament perspective. Lots to talk about from an update perspective. Oh, the patch.
Let's get into the patch. What do you mean we have nothing to talk about? But yeah, from a tournament perspective, we get a little bit of a breather, actually, because we don't have another event until a week out,
So the new patch that just dropped had a lot of new stuff outside of Call of Duty League as well. There's a new multiplayer map. There's new nerfs and buffs to certain guns, etc. Also Warzone. We'll get into the Warzone part of it a little bit later on. But the biggest thing as it pertains to the Call of Duty League is the MP5. The MP5 was certainly the meta gun. We saw upwards of 3 of them in many compositions. And now it's being nerfed. In fact, actually... when I say that, that's not entirely true. It is changed.
It was nerfed. It was nerfed / actually accidentally buffed, which is like
so the recoil reduced in time. So also what I guess the nerf part of it is how much damage the MP5 does from long range. I think that is the biggest change of the MP5 is that from long range, it now does significantly less damage. Still does the best, or what you could say is the best amount of damage at close range. But the reaction is interesting. A lot of people initially, Emily, when they saw this, they said, okay, RIP MP5, time to grind something else. A lot of people were upset about...
We've already seen a few Uzis in competitive play before.
Yeah.
Not many, but like we've already seen teams trying out the Uzi.
Yeah, definitely. But when you saw this, and also the reaction, which has now, after 24 hours of people using it, kind of shifted a little bit. What do you make of it?
I mean, it is like, I feel like only Infinity Ward could take a gun and nerf it and then accidentally buff it. If you look at the spray, there's a spray chart on the like competitive COD subreddit right now that just shows the actual gun spray, and it's actually tighter and closer, so it actually makes you more accurate. And basically all the changes they did to it, the range is decreased. You're right, it has like technically lower damage values, but what also happens, and this also has to do with the 10 millimeter attachment, which is not GA'd. Basically now when you shoot someone, there's decreased recoil and it doesn't take as many like body and limb shots to kill someone. So it's funny. I mean, like all I can do at this point is laugh, right? Because I've been so incredibly frustrated with the changes that they've made in competitive. And I'm sorry that you're going to hear some background noise because they're still cleaning outside my apartment.
That's okay. That's what it was.
I know, it's great. It sounds like a leaf blower. I'm not really sure. But yeah, like I think the big thing is that it actually technically, despite the decreased range, made people more accurate. And so it's not actually a nerf. And only Infinity Ward would be able to do this, in my opinion.
Can you imagine like they're in a room and like, you know how like how you've said many times, you know, Infinity Ward doesn't care about esports, which many people believe to be true.
They don't.
But can you just imagine them in a room where they're just like, okay, how can we mess with the Call of Duty League? MP5, let's nerf the hell out of it. But then they do the opposite. So it's like now they're like, no, we made it better.
I mean, they've already not announced spawn changes, twice now. So, you know, that's been fun. I mean, honestly, I think people are kind of crossing their fingers and just waiting for Treyarch to actually have an actual announcement, not a leak that comes out about whatever we're going to get for 2021. That's what I'm doing anyway. So, I mean, I just wanted to bring it up. The pro reaction has been, like, I feel like similar, where they're just like, okay, this is BS. But again, not much that anyone can really do about it. I do think we still will see people maybe trying out the Uzi, oh my gosh, I keep saying Uzi because of the player. I think we'll
I was gonna say,
still see. I know that was a mistake. We'll still see people trying out the Uzi more. I think a bit more, and we'd already seen that shift start to happen anyway. But as to whether this is going to break the MP5 meta, again, it makes the gun more accurate, so probably not.
Also, the 10 millimeter bullets. I think that's a big contested item as well. It seems like that got a buff overall,
Yeah,
and
I
now
mean,
it sounds like. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, I was gonna say that's what makes the MP5 like that good of a gun. Like on its own, it wouldn't be good. It's the 10 millimeter attachment that really makes the difference.
And now there's like this other angle to it where now, speaking of GAs, which we can now talk about GAs, which is very nice. I know. Wow. Man. Remember the days? Do you remember the days, Emily? I'm sure you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But now, like, teams maybe that are at the bottom of the standings are looking to just GA the attachment out of the league. Like that that's something else.
That's one way to get rid of it, and it's one way they could have gotten rid of it previously. I never know what goes on behind the scenes in terms of like how pros decide what they want to GA. The one thing I absolutely just completely agree with that's gone on this year is the kill streak GA, because that is absolutely ridiculous if you've ever played the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that's not a thing. But I'm not shocked that they didn't GA this, because I'm never like completely shocked when pros decide not to GA something. But at this point, I don't think they will, because they've already used it for the majority of the game anyway. It does change from now until champs, basically. So I know a lot of people are looking at it as like, we played with this gun for the majority of the season, and now we have like only another 5 to 6 weeks left in the competitive season. Is that right? Wow, we're already in July. Jeez.
Right. The months just blend together at this point, right?
I have no idea what time it is or what day it is ever. So, I mean, I think that's the big thing. Like, we need to see how, because it is still a change, and we're going to have to see how teams adjust to it before the biggest tournament of the year. And that is that's the big competitive thing for me. That's also why I don't think they'll GA it now, because that would be even more of a radical shift in terms of competitive gun meta than just learning how to use this new nerfed, in air quotes, MP5.
We, in asking some of the pros and staff members around the Call of Duty League, one of the common comps that came up was 1 M4, 3 Uzis, and 1 MP5.
Mm-hmm.
So this definitely won't. I think the consensus is this definitely will not kill the MP5 from the meta. It's still too strong to not be used, especially in close quarters. It'll hurt entry fraggers for sure, especially as they try to close the range. But when they're initially far away, that's going to hurt a little bit. But still, the other thing is, though, is that a lot of teams around the league already have 2 or more good AR players on their roster. So I don't like, if we're going to see more, and we've seen this already in most recent tournaments, the increase of AR players and that role as the meta has progressed through the season, Emily. But like, I think that it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be too much of a seismic change, because there are a lot of AR players that maybe, and especially flex players as well, for them to be able to switch on the fly the way they can. I don't know if this is going to be too much of a detriment to a lot of teams in the league. It might actually be a positive.
I mean, I never know, because like even the spawn shift affected a lot of teams, in my opinion, right? Like they had to learn how to play off of spawn a lot differently to a change that wasn't even formally announced. So I still think it will affect teams. We're just not going to know in what way until we see it. I don't think it's going to be like a massive drastic impact in terms of what we're looking at for the standings necessarily. But I do think, since the middle of the pack is still like really, really tight and close, and it's kind of loosened up during Florida's domain at the top over the past 2 events, I think you might be able to see some teams sneak in there if they do end up enjoying this gun meta a bit more.
So, and the good thing is that there's still a couple weeks for these players to grind and practice and scrim on the new patch until the next event, which is a couple of weeks from now. And of course, we'll have continued coverage here on Search and Destroy. Thanks for watching us wherever you are, by the way, Twitch, ESPN app, Twitter, YouTube. Also listening to us wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify. Also in the patch was a change to Warzone. Goes up to 200. The lobby increases. Also, there's now Juggernaut suit matches. You get massive armor and a minigun. I looked up, so I do a weekly Battle Royale column on our website, and I looked up the numbers of how many people have been watching recently, and Fortnite still leads the way. Like even this morning, there was 178,000 people watching Fortnite streams, but Warzone is pretty much the consensus second most watched BR right now. And this morning it was 123,000. So there's still a gap there, but it's definitely closing in the gap versus the third place Apex Legends, which is at 48,000. And remember how great it was when it first launched, and it was exceeding Fortnite with all the hype and the honeymoon phase and all the streamers that were attached to it. But now Warzone has really solidified itself as the second most popular Battle Royale title.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at Fortnite and its popularity, it's just a completely different age bracket, I think. And I think a lot of parents find something like Fortnite more palatable than Warzone. But we've talked about Warzone a lot. In fact, because IW is so kind of anti-competitive, they've obviously poured a lot more time and effort into Warzone, which if I was a competitive pro would piss me off a little bit. And just a little, just a tiny, tiny bit. But I think that, again, the big thing with Warzone that I always like to bring up is that it's something that almost everyone plays. Like even some of my friends who aren't super into playing competitive like esports games will play Warzone with me, right? Or a lot of the traditional sports athletes who are, still kind of stuck in their homes or have been stuck in their homes for a while until recently. I think they also play a lot of Warzone because COD is still in the US anyway, the big AAA title. So most people have it. And most people play it casually. And Warzone is not only like part of that, but also free. And since everyone has it, everyone can play it. And I think it's really frustrating because I wish they'd done so much more for competitive, and the competitive issues that we've had this year have just been really frustrating to watch week after week. But at the very least, we have Warzone. So I guess that's something. For me, like I would still rather see changes to competitive, but I do think it has, I would say it's like the second most popular battle royale. I would have to agree with that. Yeah. And the other thing to remember again is to loop back full circle. Fortnite is just a different audience in my opinion.
So you're absolutely right. And also it's the one that's always going to be attract the wider, more casual audience in the way that it's constructed and its integrations that it does with brands and athletes and musicians, etc. Let's talk about the league now. Obviously, this weekend we're off. We're back next weekend with the New York Subliners home series, July 10th to 12th. In action will be Toronto, Paris, Chicago, London, LAG, Atlanta, Minnesota, and the hosts, the Subliners. Before we get there, though, on July 6th, that's the trade deadline. That is when the teams will have locked in their positions for the remainder of the season. So we look at the schedule, or pardon me, we look at the standings. We see LAG at the bottom. We see Seattle, and we know we've talked about Seattle at length and their issues and challenges. Then we see interesting teams like the Subliners are still 7th, still in the bottom half. Then you got Toronto in 10th. Then you got Optic Gaming in 8th. But these teams have shown impressive results in recent tournaments. So when you look at the standings, Emily, do you pinpoint any teams here that might make a late move here before the rosters are locked?
I'm not really sure. Like with Toronto, I think they're still like they've kind of been experimenting with their lineup since week 1, right?
Yeah.
And trying to find a probably to your frustration since you're the Toronto fan here. Actually, I thought Kleenex looked good. I was expecting him to not look as good as he did just based on other things I've heard from him coming from Black Ops 4 to Modern Warfare, but he looked really good with the team in my opinion. I think if there's a team, like, even though the Gorillas are in last, I actually like a lot of what we've seen from them. Their S&D is sick. I think they will probably end up just sticking with this lineup. I'm not really sure who would make changes because I feel like we've seen, like, for example, a lot of the mid-tier teams, the Rocker have kind of said they're not going to make changes. I don't see the Empire, Huntsman, Mutineers, or Atlanta making changes. And then you have the Subliners and Royal Ravens that already made their changes and, in my opinion, have both looked better because of them, with Zero and Mac. So I think, in my opinion, and I mean, I could be wrong because I feel like I'm always really hesitant to call roster changes. And in the past, like, I didn't, like, you were the one that was like, yeah, Pristini's going to go to the Huntsman. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm always hesitant to, like, necessarily call roster changes. But the only teams I would think maybe might look at them would maybe be Seattle or Legion, because I think those two teams have struggled the most lately. But, like, even Toronto still experimenting with their lineup. I think the Gorillas are going to stick to the lineup that they have because they've actually shown stronger performances as that roster has continued to gel together. And Blast, I think, has one of the highest KDAs online, like, of any player, or like the highest KDA increase from offline to online of any player. So I think even some of these teams will stick with it. And then, like I said previously, we've already seen some of the mid-tier teams like the Royal Ravens, like the Subliners, already make their moves and look better. So they, in my opinion, should be looking to stick with those rosters because they've already seen increased improvement in results with them.
Yeah, I think honestly, the team that I think might make a move, or at least the one most likely to, is the Rocker. And the reason I say that is not because they're a bad team. It's just based on recent results. And we've seen how quickly teams react to a poor tournament performance, or even, 2 back-to-back tournament performances. The Rocker are still a very good team. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is their last results at tournaments have not been up to what they would want to accomplish, especially given how they performed at the start of the season. So maybe there might be a feeling there that they have not transitioned as well as they thought they could online, and perhaps looking at replicating a success of a team, say, like the Florida Mutineers, who essentially built an online team from the ground up and possibly made the best transactions of the entire season, right? Maybe the Rocker are looking at this and say, should we maybe decide to either make swaps with some subs that have been playing very well online, or possibly look elsewhere, if anyone exists at the challengers level, to see if there's anybody that we can bolster this roster with to at least have some options. Because they're the ones who we, at this beginning of the season, had always been talking about. This is the best of the rest team. This is the team that deserves a tournament win based on their progression and their support in the city of Minnesota. But now we're not saying that anymore. Now we're saying they are starting to, even though they're fifth in the standings, it seems a little silly to say because every team makes the playoffs at the end of the day. They're the ones who have not been impressing with their recent tournament performances.
I mean, I think the counter argument to that is I know they had looked to prepare better for their home series, and then Alex was injured. It's really unfortunate. I think the other thing with the Rocker, I think my only pushback on that, because I know one of the things that they talked about is that they weren't all in the same place, and then they were working to all get back in the same place because they found that they were so much better when they were together and at the training facility and having a more, not rigid, but like a more strict schedule, I guess, where, you get up and you go to the training facility and you practice together, et cetera, et cetera. This team was also built as a roster these are people that were very specifically selected. A few of them had wanted to play together in pairs or suggested each other. So that would be, I think, my only pushback on the rocker,
Sure.
because I don't think they've been super reactive, and I think they've been really supportive of sticking with this lineup. But who knows? You've called roster moves way ahead of me. So next week, maybe we'll revisit this and see that you were right and I was wrong again.
To be fair, a lot of this to me is the fact that, and you and I know this because we're both well versed in traditional sports as well. The frequency and the speed at which changes are made in esports is far quicker than the amount of time that you are given in any other form of competition. Esports moves at such a rapid rate, especially as it pertains to players and rosters. You don't get a season. You don't even get half a season most of the time, right? You just don't.
You better perform or else.
You better go now. Like, you better have this. It's like the best comparison I can make is like goaltenders in hockey. It's like you get if you have a couple of bad games as a goaltender, you're going to be subbed out for the other goaltender. But that's not permanent, right? Like you're playing with 2 goaltenders for the season, sometimes 3, and they're playing like swapping out. So it's like you're riding the hot hand. Not in esports. In esports, you're bad, you might be gone forever from that team. It might be over. That's it. You're just forgotten about, and hopefully another team will pick you up. So we'll see. I'm not saying that there will 100% be a change. I am saying I wouldn't be surprised if the Rocker made at least one change. But then again, I said that about Pristini, and then he ended up joining the Chicago Huntsmen. Let me just pat myself on the back. I'm not often right, okay? I'm not often right, so let me just. But as we let's transition into that now. But because Pristini joining Chicago was definitely one of the biggest storylines of the season. I wouldn't say, though, that was the most monumental trade. It was from a storyline perspective and Pristini's history, but really the Florida Mutineers are the team you look at when you talk about the most impactful trades this season or acquisitions.
Yeah, I was going to say they're not trades, but I think the moves that the Mutineers made are going to be considered the best of the season unless Chicago Huntsmen take it all in the end, or a team like London or New York manages to take it all at the end, because they also, in my opinion, made like really specific changes that I think have improved both of those teams, again, with Mac and Zero. So Florida, though, I mean, I talked to Faro and the team when they were in Los Angeles, and it just seemed from the get-go that he suited their play style a lot more because he was a bit slower. And then bringing in, like, Awakening has been absolutely insane since he arrived on that team. And it just seems like a team that they've, again, really focused internally on how the team gels together as a unit. And also, I made a note of this on Twitter when I was listening to them at the last event, but their comms are some of the chillest I've heard of any COD team. They seem like so weirdly relaxed, and there's only like so much you can draw from comms, right? Because every team communicates differently. And so I'm not saying that they're better than other teams, but it does give a sense of a team that knows how they want to play and kind of knows who they are. And I think that's actually really invaluable for any team in esports. And so I do think the changes that the Mutineers have made are definitely the most impactful this season, barring, like I said, if Preston and the Huntsmen end up taking everything in the end, or if like you somehow manage to get a sneaky dark horse like the Subliners or the Royal Ravens.
What do we make of the original big 3 from this season? Atlanta, Dallas, and Chicago. Where do we think they are? Are they perennial contenders? Are they still favorites among those predicting champs? Atlanta, certainly. Dallas and Chicago might be a little bit more in question than Atlanta. But even as compared to Florida, when we go into champs, what are your thoughts on them?
I mean, Atlanta are like, and I hate to make this comparison because they're a completely different team, but in terms of like style, but their past two performances have kind of reminded me of Invictus Gaming in League of Legends, where it's like they can't keep getting away with it. Like they can't keep getting away with these five map series, like reverse sweep, like clinching, like their opponents clinch defeat from the jaws of victory, that kind of thing. I don't want to take away anything from the FaZe, because to be as consistent as they have across the entire season, online and offline, is super impressive. There's only been one event that they've been at where they have not made a final, and it was Los Angeles. There's only been one event that they haven't made a final at, which is pretty insane if you think about it, right? So I like the FaZe are just so consistent from event to event to event, that even though we're talking kind of about their quote unquote like decline as a team, because they're not just like absolutely roasting people in like 3-0 series anymore, I think that's something to be lauded. Like the fact that this team has still been so consistent across everything. With Florida, I mean, I don't want to say like the kings of online, because I don't want it to seem like I'm taking away from anything, but I think they are another team to beat. Like it's no longer the big three anymore, right? You have to consider Florida, like we've talked about this, you have to consider Florida one of the best teams in the league, especially since my presumption is that we're not going to see any offline play based on how the pandemic is going in the United States right now. Mm-hmm. And that's my assumption. I know absolutely nothing, guys. Like this is not insider information or anything. I'm just saying, I don't think we're going to see another LAN event until 2021. And then there's a Huntsman.
Wait, are you saying that we're not going to see Worlds? Did you just break this news here that Worlds in League of Legends is not happening?
Oh, no, I meant
no LANs in 20. Oh, okay, I was just curious.
I meant
I was gonna clip it and put it on League of Legends Reddit and say breaking news: Emily Rand calls.
Yeah, that'd be
great. That wouldn't be because that wouldn't pop off at all. Okay, let's.
And then like the Empire and the Huntsman, I think still have to be considered. I still, for whatever reason, I still like the Empire a little bit more than the Huntsman. I think that they've looked like a more complete team. And just in terms of like the way they've actually played, I can never rule them out of winning an event, where the Huntsmen have still been a lot shakier and inconsistent, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think it's the big three anymore, because I think you have to include Florida, especially with the rest of the events being online.
I don't think that Florida replaces a team in the big three, so to speak. I think it's the big four now. I think that Florida has earned their seat at the table. So it's not the original big three. Now that top of the mountain has grown to include one more, because Florida has done enough for me to still be right now, even though we haven't had tournaments since I said this last week, obviously, but they are the best team in the league right now. And they are my favorites. If I had to make a prediction bracket for champs right now, even though we don't know the matchups, pick one team on paper. If I had to, I would pick Florida based on their recent performances and how well they've played against the other big three teams. Really, the biggest team that's given them trouble are the subliners. And the subliners also are a team where you look at, like we used to look at the Rocker and say, this is a team that deserves a tournament final or a tournament win based on how they've played, in particular Mac Melts. Speaking of somebody who is, if Mac Melts is on a CDL team, one person that is not on a CDL team anymore is Karma, who retired this season. And that is definitely a big storyline, because it goes back to what you were saying, Emily, about how this game just really takes the fun out of people's enjoyment, and how it just sucks the passion dry, and how there was a convergence of many things for Karma, but you could still point to this particular game and the lack of enjoyment as the catalyst for everything else to fall in line and create that perfect storm for someone like Karma to retire at this point in the season.
Yeah, I'm still kind of not over Karma retiring. And the fact, I know he's done like more content over the past week, which is why we're kind of talking about it again. But like when he when he initially retired, it seemed like everyone on the day was like, "Oh my gosh, we're so sad. This is insane." And then like it suddenly like fell like off, and then no one was talking about it. And I'm like, "Come on, guys! Like karma deserves more." Um, I am still really sad that he retired, and I'm kind of like secretly holding out hope that he'll somehow come back, but I don't think it just doesn't seem, because again, like I talked about this, we've talked about this previously, right? Like,
I know.
or you're like, I want him to come back, and I'm like, I do too, and you're like, he's gonna come back when
Next season, I feel it. I don't know. I
but
don't know.
I mean, I think the big thing was that again, he said that it wasn't just this COD. It was like this COD was the straw that broke the camel's back figuratively, but the previous ones too. He'd been like, I can only play this game for a few months before getting bored, or I don't want to play it and I don't want to grind it anymore. And unfortunately, that's something that you kind of have to do in order to stay, on top relatively. So
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, because I didn't ask this last week regarding Karma. Let's say Karma was on Atlanta FaZe. Do you think he would have retired?
I can't even imagine Karma on Atlanta.
Or more generally, a team that's competing at the top of the tables?
Doing well. He might have waited until the end of the year to retire, but he just seemed so tired. You know, like I think regardless, this might have been a breaking point, I guess. By the way, I cannot imagine him on the FaZe whatsoever. Like
the FaZe are a complete team, but yes.
Like broke my brain. I was like, wait, what? How is that?
What? Stop being dumb, Arda. That's just silly. What? That's ridiculous. That's preposterous. Yes. You know what I mean. I mean a good team.
Yeah.
Biggest surprises of the season. I don't even think Florida is a surprise. I think we should have. I mean, when we look back on it, hindsight being 2020, we probably should have seen this coming. Like, they built a team that is well suited to be online, and they picked up players who either have a proven track record or had been performing extremely well online in Awakening's case. So, like, yeah, you get what you invest in. Like, good for you. That's exactly what you should be thinking, especially given the environment that we're in. So, I don't know. What would you consider your biggest surprise of the season so far?
I mean, I still think it's Florida actually, because Pharaoh was really good in World War II, but people didn't give him a chance going into this season. And after they won and then lost their own home series and didn't make it to bracket stage, I was like, okay, this might have been kind of a fluke. I think the credit to Florida goes in, again, like to your point, I actually agree with your explanation, but I still find Florida surprising given how consistent they were in adding pieces that they really wanted to add around this team. And like the big quote unquote risk, I think, was definitely Awakening, because even though everything is online, you still never know like how a rookie is going to end up performing, right? I feel like it's always a risk. Maybe not necessarily a big risk, considering I assume that they scrimmed with him, obviously, right? And they obviously picked him for a reason. And Dallas has said this over and over and over again about Shotzi and Illy, right? Like, where they're like, we picked these people for a reason. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that we're wrong. However, I still think that that's always a risk, and sometimes rookies take a little bit longer to adjust, like Illy and Shotzi again. And Awakening has come on and been insane from like moment one for this team. So that's not something that I feel like you could predict, which also makes Florida really surprising for me. I do think that some of like, for example, Frosty's like Halo career and how consistent Skies has been, and how good Havoc was even last year when he was on Gen G. I think like those have been kind of underrated in when we look at the initial Florida lineup, because those guys have been around since week one. But in terms of Florida taking 3 Call of Duty League titles, that is not something I expected.
So, yeah, no, that's a very good. Speaking of Awakening, if not for Skies and his like incredible stats this year and how clutch he's been for the Mutineers, he would already. I mean, you would. I don't know if you would make him like your MVP of the entire season. Definitely of this part of the season, but he would. a couple more tournament performances like this, how he has performed so far, you'd have to put him in the conversation. I don't know if there's too small a sample size to claim that he's the MVP of the season, especially because he missed the entire LAN portion of this season. But I mean, that's how impressive he is. That it wouldn't even be or unorthodox or abnormal or out of the realm of possibility that he would even be considered. That's how good he's been. It's just crazy.
Wait, Skies? Skies has been around since.
Oh, sorry. No. I mean, Awakening.
Awakening. Oh, I was like,
I said because no. because Skies' numbers are so impressive. Yeah. He's like clearly to me. Right. Yeah, he's clearly the MVP candidate of the Mutineers. But Awakening on any other team with this kind of performance and those results, if he was leading the way, would be an MVP caliber conversation. Which is crazy to think.
We have a lot of really cool Rookie of the Year conversations, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, who would you put there? Mac Melts? Awakening? I mean, I don't know if you'd put Ilian or the Dallas Empire boys in there.
You have to. I mean, they're still rookies.
Well, they're rookies, but I mean, in terms of like, who would you pick as your top 3 Rookies of the Year, or even just one? Like, I mean, Awakening is in the conversation already.
Yeah, he has to be.
Who else?
I mean, I know people are probably not going to like this answer because they've had less success than the other 2 teams we've talked about in the Empire and the Mutineers.
Oh, Mutineers.
But in terms of like the impact he's had on his team, like his arrival and the impact he's had, I actually think Mac, for me, the way I see kind of a value in a player, has been the best addition in terms of like turning a team around for Rookie, if that makes sense.
This team went from the worst team in the league almost to a respectable team that is giving the best team in the league right now a run for their money.
Well, and a team that everyone says is like really dangerous in scrims, right? Like everyone, all of the top teams, the team that they mention as like the team to watch out for is always the subliners. They're always like, the subliners are really, really good. And I think they're now the team that we're talking about, like we talked about Minnesota in the beginning of the year, where they're like this close to having that breakthrough and actually making a final and making a run at a title. And who knows, maybe it'll happen at their own home series. We're going to preview that next week.
Yes, we will. For now, we're going to just end on predictions, a little bit of predictions, and then we'll talk about our favorite and least favorite competitive maps, which I'm sure we're going to have a lot to say about. Let's rapid fire through these predictions and see what we have to say about them. Will any teams have a big successful run for the remainder of the season?
Subliners, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know what? I can see the Subliners winning a tournament. I really could. I don't think nobody would be like shocked if that happened. I think it'd be really good. I think so. I'm on board with that. Subliners win a tournament by the end of the season. That is a bold prediction, but still one that is in the realm of possibility. Will any teams fall apart between now and playoffs? Ooh.
I don't actually see a spectacular team like falling apart, because if the Rocker continue to perform like where they've been at, I feel like at this point it's kind of accepted, right? It's not like a real, like the falling apart already happened, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like the only team that comes to mind, because I still think Dallas is going to be really competitive. I still think the Huntsmen are going to be really competitive, despite the fact that they've been so inconsistent. I think the Mutineers are going to be competitive. And obviously, based on what I said earlier in this show, I definitely think FaZe are going to be competitive, right? So,
will any team outside the top 4 win one of the remaining homestands? I'm putting a firm yes on that. I feel like I can play the field for any of the 3 tournaments and credibly make a case for any of those teams to actually win a tournament. Yes.
Without looking at the brackets, because the brackets matter, the groups matter actually, but without looking at that, I'm still looking at the Subliners. I'm also looking at the Royal Ravens. I think they've had a lot of really unlucky circumstances that have been completely out of their team's control. I think they've been looking a lot better since the addition of Zero. So I'm also kind of like I don't think them winning is out of the realm of possibility.
All right, let's end the show on this. best and worst competitive maps in CDL. So just to catch everybody up, just in case you forgot, here are the maps that are available in each game mode. Hardpoint has Azir Cave, Gunrunner, Hackney Yard, Ramaza, St. Petrograd. Search and Destroy has Arklov Peak, Gunrunner, Piccadilly, Ramaza, and St. Petrograd. Domination has Gunrunner, Hackney, and St. Petrograd. So the only two maps that are a part of every single mode in the game are Gunrunner and St. Petrograd. With that all said, why do you, Emily Rand, love Azir Cave so much?
Azir Cave is my least favorite map to play on in the game, and also in competitive. It to me, I hate the design of this map. I hate how it's basically split up into like the cave area and then the outside. And what they do with the lighting is just like the terrible. There's not a lot of super long sight lines, despite the fact that it's like a larger, kind of weirdly elongated map. I just don't like it. I argue with our head video producer a lot over this because he like loves Azir Cave for some reason, and I have no idea why. We actually got into an argument at our very first COD event that we covered together. Yeah, I dislike Azir Cave strongly. I hate the spawns on it for Hardpoint. I do not like this map. I do not like playing this map. It sucks. And
it sucks. Yeah, it's not fun. I'm with you. I don't think it's fun at all. From a playing perspective, my favorite map, 100% Shipment. We agree on that. It's the most ridiculous. You don't have
hands. It's the best map because you're gonna end up killing people anyway.
These aren't hands. These are used only to fail at Call of Duty. Let me tell you. And the most fun, and I'll admit fully, other than Warzone, because I do like playing Warzone, the most fun I had playing multiplayer. I had some fun Superstore moments. I will say that. They were fun. There was some fun there. But the most fun by far was the 10v10 Shipment. Because it was so ridiculous. It's
so dumb. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. Everyone's dying all the time.
The best is when you get into the,
respawn and someone just immediately like, and then you get to do that like the next time you respawn. It's great.
Yo, the spawns are chalked in Shipment, okay? We got to fix the spawns. We need a little bit of safety.
I don't want to spawn in the container anymore.
No, the second floor container is the best spot, though. That's the only time I get a series of kills. I jump in, lay down, wait at B. Like, just hold my gun at B, in a dom, and I'm just waiting there. Just pick people off as they're running by. That's the only time I get a positive KDA. Gunrunner, I think, is the consensus best, though, right? I think we see Gunrunner predominantly the most of any map. Obviously, it's part of all three game modes, but that's for a reason, right? It has a good long sight lines. It has the nice like three-lane layout that people love in terms of map design, and also the verticality isn't a hindrance in Gunrunner, whereas it's definitely a concern at times with other maps. Gunrunner just seems, at least in Modern Warfare, among the most balanced and laid out maps.
Yeah, this is the thing with competitive, is that even though Gunrunner is like a kind of a massive map, right? It is the most even competitively. It's the one that is the most balanced for competitive, which is why you can see entire and I mean, it's a strat not to pick the best map too, right? So that's something that we need to say, is that like it's a strategy to be like, we're better on this map, even though this map is not balanced and it sucks. And in my opinion, the only map that is not like unbalanced in some way is actually Gunrunner. Which is why you sometimes see entire series where it's just Gunrunner, or you'll see a series where Gunrunner is used in every single game mode.
I'll also say that what is your favorite map aesthetically? I'm gonna say Piccadilly is mine. I like looking at Piccadilly. I enjoy the double-decker buses. I will say the scaffolding seems a little OP for me. Like, I think that positioning is very is a tough position at times for defense if you're up there and you get that spot. But looking at Piccadilly is very nice. Makes me want to go to Piccadilly.
So for map aesthetics, I actually I have a few problems with this map, but actually not as many as I do with other maps. I really like the aesthetic of Arklov Peak, actually. Like the kind of snowy uh mountainside, like with the abandoned buildings kind of and the trench in the middle. Like I don't know. I feel like that could be tweaked to be like a really good map. And it's just like a few steps away. And I also just really like the snowy mountain peak aesthetic. So yeah, I'll go with Arklov Peak for that.
What would you do to our club? Would you maybe like take away a couple buildings? Maybe it's like one or two buildings away from being a good balanced map.
Yeah, like I'm not sure. I'd probably be the worst map designer, but it's like a really slow, large map. But the reason I actually do like watching S&D on Arklov is because you have such long sight lines. So I like just watching snipers go off on that, and I also like the decisions you have to make between going above or being in the trench, right? Depending. So depending on whether you're on attack or defense, obviously. So yeah, I mean, removing buildings. I'm trying to think of what ones I'd remove. I don't know. I'll get back to you on that. I'll come up with an Arklov Peak fix by next show.
I love it.
I'll draw it out for you and everything.
What about spawns? I know that's a concern among many maps. Are there any maps in particular that just make you cringe in terms of how the spawns work? I know Ramaza is one that gets a lot of spawn hate.
Ramaza, Azir Cave again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to my hatred for Azir Cave a lot probably, but I think one of the problems that we're seeing with spawns, also like since they changed them, but also this is something that was already going on before, is that sometimes it's just ridiculous. If you like, one of the reasons why we've seen so many like random point swings where it's like, this team is at 115. Oh, suddenly we're tied up at like 150. It's because you can basically through advantageous spawns go through like P1, P2, and not have to like. It's just so hard to break those once someone has control over them. And I think that's actually a lot of maps. But Azir Cave is still, in my opinion, the worst for that. And maybe competitive COD pros would disagree, but for me, from like my outsider perspective, that is the one that I've seen kind of the most egregious spawn randomness. I think just based on the way that map's designed. Our video producer is going to come in and listen to this and going to be like, we're not releasing this as a podcast. You cannot slander Azir Cave this way.
I'm surprised he didn't interrupt us live just to give a rebuttal on Azir Cave. Let's not give him any opportunity to do so. We can end the show there. Basically, Azir Cave sucks. Let's just put it out there. May not, at least in terms of modern warfare. And Gunrunner, there's a reason you are part of every game mode, at least as far as modern warfare goes. We love Gunrunner. So that'll do it for us here on Search and Destroy. We'll be back next week for a preview of the New York Subliners home series. That is July 10th to 12th. Once again, in action, Toronto, Paris, Chicago, London, LAG, Atlanta, Minnesota, and the hosts themselves. Emily and Arda will be back with you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.